Всім доброго дня. Вітаю вас
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our event that is dedicated to strategic planning. As you are already aware, because I see at least 50% of people who attended the previous event. Today basically is the segue that leads us to how we can change things, how can overcome problems. So today we're not going to talk about challenges, but rather about the ways to overcome them, but we're going to talk about it later. Now I'd like to give the floor for opening remarks to Tanya Stanford. Here is the mic. The head of the company that is implementing our RFA project in Ukraine. Thank you, Alexander.
Everyone, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. I think you are all heroes for arriving here this morning after the night that we had, and some of you I got to see in the shelter last night. But I guess that is the secret of Ukraine's resilience, that we are all here. So thank you very much. This is an incredibly important topic, we think, that we are gathered to talk about today. And this is the second session that we have had to look at the recommendations for local planning, the methodologies and the tools. And I want to say, first of all, thank you for working with us on the first session that we had recently when we were looking at the issues. And today we're going to be continuing that work. And your input and the input of others that are not present today has been really helpful in us identifying where there are areas for improvement and helping us to formulate the recommendations. And as I was talking to some of you as we were coming in, I know that we have representatives from civil society, from local government, and from other projects. And it makes me very happy that all of you have been here, have decided to come here this morning and participate in this exercise, because we know often that it's difficult, especially with projects, to get us to work around a particular issue and come to a common consensus on what we should be doing. And in this area in particular, I think it's extremely important that we collaborate, we understand what things should be, what recommendations we should have, what tools we should be using, what approaches we should be using, so that we have a common approach that is used across the country. Of course, there will be differences as we all implement, as different communities obviously have their specific needs, but it's important for us to be able to have a common methodology that makes the plans that are being done at the communities logical and understandable for those, not just in the communities, but for those at the national level as well. And if it is to have any sort of interpretation or meaning for those that are in the line ministries and for the ministries, for the Ministry of Development of Communities and Territories as well. But second, it's also important for us to have a common methodology, I think, because eventually we know that Ukraine is a leader in digitization. We know that everything here has been, so many things have been digitized in Ukraine, and really, I'm coming from Canada. I will say this in front of our Canadian embassy representative, but coming from Canada, we are not quite as advanced as you are in Ukraine in terms of digitization. You have been able to leap ahead of us, and that's an amazing thing. And I can imagine that with local plans and with other data that is going into local plans, that there will be a possibility to digitize in the foreseeable future. And when you digitize, you have to have some common methodology, you have to have common inputs. And so we are trying to look ahead here a few years down the road and think about what that might look like for approaches and for plans. So today we're going to be looking at the recommendations. This is in fact the second session. It is the final session in this project that we have been cooperating with the International Renaissance Foundation. And I would like to thank them, of course, for their cooperation, for their financial support, but for their cooperation and openness to work with us on this project together. Once we finish with the recommendations, and Alexander will tell us more about this, but we will be passing the recommendations to the Ministry of Development of Communities and Territories. And of course, we have our representative, the Deputy Minister, Mr. Rabican from the ministry here with us today. So not only is he here to welcome us on behalf of the ministry, but also he will be reviewing, him and his team, our recommendations, revising and approving. So we hope to have a common methodology at the end of this process that we can all be using. I think that that's incredibly important as well because there's so much work to be done in Ukraine. There's so many, as we understand, the number of communities is large, the number of plans that must be done is huge, and it's only really together that we're going to be able to go forward and to make progress on the monumental task ahead of us. And finally, I'd like to thank the Canadian government. The Recovery for All project is funded by the Government of Canada, but also hugely supported in terms of our work. Many of you know that we have just started our new project. We are actively involved in 19 communities in Ukraine. Much of the findings that we have also developed have come from practical experience working with communities on strategic planning over the last year and a half, but going from a point of understanding what the problems are, developing recommendations, and helping them do the very tricky task of defining priorities, which is something that is always really, really difficult to do in a situation like we have in Ukraine, when we have to do everything at the same time and yesterday. We will soon be moving on to add another 6 communities to our pilots, and then over the next couple of years, we will be adding another 25. So for us, we will be having 50 communities that we will be working with directly. And I would just mention Tatiana Lebahorska here, who is leading that work, if you're interested to know more about that. But we are only one project. 50 communities, as we understand, is a really small percentage of communities in the country. And that's why, again, we want to make sure that the work we are doing is feeding a larger understanding of what strategic planning can look like in Ukraine, and trying to help us have tools that are available to everyone to make our work more understandable to each other and to have a more enhanced result. So thank you once again for being with us today. I know that you've come to a session where we're asking you to work. We're asking for your feedback. It's incredibly valuable. And I know that's not easy to do on a day where we're all sleep deprived, but I'm sure that we will have some great results by the end of the day. So thank you in advance for your participation. And at this moment, I'd like to pass the floor to our Canadian Embassy representative, Amal Azouz, who is the project lead for the RFA project. Amal?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I will join my voice to Tanya's declaration and really thank you for being awake this morning and being with us and being ready to work. I think this showcases the resilience of your communities, the resilience of your organizations, of your central government as well. And I would like to start with thanking Alinia and the whole team for all their efforts in several sections of the decentralization effort of this country. Yes, there is the local work, but also the central work in terms of strategies, of planning, of coordination, of opening the door to other partners as well. And I see several of them present in this room, and I'm happy to see you here joined in the same effort. I would like also to take the time to thank the Ukrainian defenders for all their work through the last days and how they successfully protected all of us here and elsewhere. And this is, for me, a proof of the importance of our presence on the ground every day, as long as it will be needed, and I hope it won't be too long. Finally, I want to thank all the participants from the civil society organization. I know that the efforts are incredibly hard to reach, and you are giving your time sometimes without being recognized for it, but I do think that you need to be recognized as a strong force of this country, and without you, we wouldn't be here now. The success of the decentralization effort that was started in 2014 is now being seen little by little. This is how Ukraine resisted the full-scale invasion, and this is how Ukraine will be able to recover and reconstruct itself in an inclusive and open manner, and it's a key element for Canada. Our effort in this sphere has been long and will continue with years. Our partners are multiple, and we will keep working with you to ensure that the Ministry for Development of Communities and Territories will be able to have the tools to implement its national strategy at all levels. The regional strategy is advancing, and we are happy to see those documents being included in the national one, and we hope to see the 1,478 local strategies be heard and included as well in the national one. And your presence, Deputy Minister, today is a proof of your effort in listening to your local communities, their voices, their differences, and the different situations that they are facing. We do know there is a lot of effort being done in this sphere, and we thank you for that. Canada will keep supporting you, and the decentralization is not only for the EU accession, it's also for long-term solutions for your communities. And we can't emphasize more than that in saying Canada is built the same way, and you can learn from our partners, Canadian or otherwise, the experiences that we had. Our communities must be thriving, must be heard, must be included, and that's what creates a stronger country. We would like to salute and recognize the effort presented today by Alinea in trying to coordinate broader than only with you guys, local leaders, that I'm happy to see, but also with other partners that are following the same path in different specialities. And it is important for us to say that we will keep coordinating with the ministry at all levels in order to ensure that this solution will stay living and thriving and helping you in succeeding in reconstruction of Ukraine. I'm not going to repeat everything that Tanya has so well spoken about, but I will salute the efforts that every and each of one is doing. We are aware as donors, and we talk about your efforts every day, and I think this is our role to only support you in your plans and respect your will. And I hope that this strategic event will be very fruitful for you, and that you will have solutions and peer conversation that will feed in local initiatives that will stay alive for you for years to go. So thank you, and I will give the floor to Sasha. Thank you very much.
Дякую. Дякую дуже.
Thank you.
Дякую дуже за вітальні слова.
Thank you so much for your opening remarks and for setting the mood after a sleepless night. We need to be in a good mood so that we can be more efficient. I'd like to give the floor to Alexei Rabikin, Deputy Minister for Communities and Territories Development of Ukraine, who was already mentioned today on a few occasions by Tanya and by embassy representatives. So the floor is yours, Alexei.
Ні, не везе. Просто я ліг спати, потім прокинувся, злізати з ліжка мені було ліньки. От, послухав 2 години ці маршрути наших дронів, які якраз от повз будинок, і потім знову заснув. Це наша адаптація, це наша реальність, це наша десь травма, але це і наша сила. Знаєте, операція «Бліц» тривала 57 днів. Операція «Бліц» – це бомбардування нацистами Лондона. 57 безперервних ночей бомбардувань. 40 тисяч людей загинуло, було дуже багато руйнувань. Хто знає, який сьогодні день війни? Хто знає? 1203. Я теж не знав. Я подивився в Вікіпедії, поки пані представниця посольства виступала, я подивився в Вікіпедії, який 1203.
1203rd.
Ми не пам'ятаємо номер.
We
Ми
can't even remember.
спілкувалися.
We got used to it. It's
Я
part of our
дякую
life now.
українським партнерам за
I thank our
величезну
Canadian
допомогу,
partners
яку
for the
ви
great
надаєте нашій
help and
громаді,
support
нашим
that you've
регіонам,
been rendering to our
можливості
communities,
організовувати
regions,
можливо
and the
відсвяткування
ministry, of
страти
course.
ціни.
This is
Дякую, очільник
beyond
ради,
value.
сьогодні в
This
тому
is
числі. Дякую, що ви з
unbelievable.
нами завжди. Це
Thank you
для
for
нас
being
справді дуже
today
потужно.
here in person.
Дякуємо за ту роботу, яку ви робите, зокрема,
Thank you for the work you've been doing to support the communities in their efforts to do strategic planning.
коли трошки більше ніж 6 місяців тому я став
But you know,
міністра,
when I became deputy minister around 6 months ago,
громади і чому
I couldn't quite understand why communities should
робити свої стратегії.
develop their
Я
strategies.
подумав, що якщо не буде якогось
But
зрозумілого
I
мотиву
thought,
для них, вони
you
не
know,
будуть робити
unless
свої
they
стратегії.
understand why they're doing this,
Певне
they
дороговказство,
won't do it.
візія, певний
Because
набір заходів,
strategy
які
is a vision. It
говоримо, що
includes measures and steps, etc. But then
ще не стосувався
BIM
і
came.
регіонів і громад,
It didn't concern the level of regions and communities. If there is strategy, you get the money. If you don't have the strategy, there's no money. In June, we will start preparing short-term plans for investments in the regions. And then in November, when we travel out to the regions to update their development strategies, I told them, you won't get any money unless you have strategies in place. Well done. So they now realize it's important, but I think we are also now at the verge of introducing some digital tool as well. We're now introducing information system for regional development as the source of statistical data. For me, I couldn't quite understand that, how come the communities don't know what their neighbors are doing, what they are planning. And it's wrong to develop one region and not know what you're doing in the other region, what your neighbors are doing. So that needs to be fixed. We're working on it. And we're doing all we can despite the ongoing war, because you don't get better times. And in fact, we can now expedite things. We can do things that we couldn't do during peace times. It's a time for challenge, but it's also a great opportunity. And it is my pleasure to wish you every
implementing the best thing that later on can be used on all governance level. I'm not going to take up any more of your time, and I am pretty sure that you feel very ambitious today, that you're very willing to work, and my team is going to stay here. The head of the department for regional policy for integration will be here, Natalia Globa, the advisor to the minister, and she basically is focusing on strategy and planning, and I think you're going to have a very fruitful discussion. And if I may, I will have to leave because the war is ongoing and we need to plan evacuation from certain territories. That is why, unfortunately, I will not be able to stay with you for the rest of the day, but we're in touch with you, and the ministry is always open to any suggestions from your side, because only having united our efforts, we will be able to not only develop good policy, but to also implement it. Good policy becomes good only after you have implemented it. So thank you so much. Every success to you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexei, for being with us throughout all three stages that when we were looking at the best practice, and now when we are looking at the solutions to how to overcome some of the challenges. And I would like to give the floor to Vitaly Protsenko, Director of the Department of Strategic Planning and Regional Policy of the Ministry for Communities and Territories Development. Good morning. It is a pleasure to welcome the representatives of local governance, our international partners, civil society. And I would like to thank you for picking a very relevant topic that will be discussed today. Since strategic planning at the local level in the recent years have become a very relevant and pressing issue. First, I would like to give you a few figures. Everyone understands the degree of destruction. We're talking about 524 billion USD. And we understand that a large share of our territories, about 19% of our territory, is under occupation. And unfortunately, currently it is not controlled by our government, and we do not fully understand what is the current situation there. We do not understand how many people are even left there. We also should understand that there are two huge challenges that we're facing: the destruction and the huge migration of population. People are moving both to the adjacent regions and moving abroad. And also we should not forget that we are a candidate for the EU membership. We should not forget that we have to implement the reforms that will allow us to rely on the structural funds of the European Union that will finally let us take our place in the European family. As Alexei has already mentioned today, the ministry is currently engaged in multiple various activities. And first and foremost, we're talking about implementing proper territory-oriented approach. The strategy that we have updated does not contain the breakdown of the macro territories, but we're awaiting that in the coming month we will also implement macro regions, and we will start picking and selecting communities, which will allow us to properly plan development of various territories, since they require various tools, various mechanisms, and various assistance from the state and our international partners. Now, speaking about the planning cycle for 2020-2034, we have to do our homework that we have not yet done. First, we're talking about working on strategy at the national, regional, and local level. Let us not forget that we have lots of common projects, the concept for integrated development, etc. And it needs to be simplified. And ministry also has certain ideas. And I believe that in the coming months, we will have a better understanding of what to do with that. We also understand that the best document at the level of the region community is a strategy. The strategy that needs to take into account the spatial development, it needs to focus on it. And of course, it has to take into account the budget planning. In July, we're gonna start preparing midterm plans for public investment, and only those programs that comply with strategic goals and priorities are eligible for funding. Because you can write many things on a sheet of paper and then start looking for money to implement that. But if we're talking about methodological approach, and today we will be talking about methodological approach at the local level, I would like to tell you a few words about what the ministry is doing in this regard. We're planning a new cycle of policy 2020-2034 that will rely on the recovery experience that we already have. Those things that Ukraine has been implemented for 3 years, those success stories that we already have, and Europe is changing, and their approaches to coherency policy are also changing. We have a very powerful support from OECD, and we started a joint project dedicated to planning for 2028-2034. And we also have a very good support from our colleagues. we have created a working group that brings together some of the best experts in Ukraine. And together with our European partners, we'll be able to develop a very good methodology and a good tool for the coming years, because we're very optimistic and we believe that maybe we will be lucky and starting 2028 we will be the fully fledged members of the European Union, which means that we should be prepared to rely on the structural funds of the European Union. But again, this is our homework. We have to do a very good preparation. Next, digital tools. The geoinformation system that Alexei has mentioned is already operational. The regions are already starting to digitize their strategies because there are certain strategical data, and I hope that by the end of the year we will already be able to demonstrate how the communities can use this system in a proper way, because this is what matters, and the community will be able to take a look at their neighbors, to look at the regional development strategy, and also rely on it instead of just inventing the wheel. And let us not forget about the DREAM system, because if we're talking about public investment system, all projects have to be submitted in a digital format and they have to be selected. You know, the geoinformation system of the regional development is selecting the projects and then they are submitted to DREAM. Of course, I hope that next year this will become a reality. I would like to thank our colleagues and partners. We have been collaborating with them for a long time. We have been working with them on conceptual things and regional policy and things that need to be done now, things that need to be simplified so that it works, so that there are no any extra restrictions or limitations. And today we will be with you. In case you have any questions, please raise your voice. We're willing to listen to your opinion. We're willing to find out what the ministry can improve, what the ministry can simplify, what recommendations we can provide, etc. So thank you. And let us have a very useful and fruitful day together. Thank you. Thank you, Vitaly. Vitaly. Yes? Well, while Vitaly is going back to his seat, I would like to say that we have to dive deeper into talking, when we're talking about problems, you know, we cannot just talk about recommendations without mentioning the problems or challenges. And everything that you're are gonna here is based on the paper that has already been published, and the presentation that you're gonna see now will be presented by Denis Chernitsky, the leading expert in methodology and international experience, decentralized recovery team leader in the RFA project, based on the paper that he worked with. And I see many experts, those people who also worked on it, provided their recommendations. It covers all of the things that you have pointed out. I cannot guarantee that you will be happy with everything that will be presented, but we definitely have taken into account each and every single recommendation. So now let us find out about how can it be resolved, how can it be all united in one methodology, in one document. Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Could you please start my presentation? First and foremost, I would like to thank everyone for coming today. I understand that today is a very difficult day because I also slept for about an hour, so please don't be too critical of me. Just wake me up. Yeah, exactly. Just wake me up in case I start sleeping. Here's a QR code. In case you cannot see my presentation, well, you can scan the QR code and you can view it on your device. And while I'm waiting for the clicker, oh, here it is. I'd like to say a few words about our approach. I believe that as all the people present here, it is impossible to develop a document that everyone will be happy with. That is why today we would like to show you key suggestions and key tools that we offer to include to the methodological recommendations but we will share the recommendations with the ministry because they are the ones working on the policy, and then we will show you some key proposals, key suggestions, and okay, it works. So I'd like to look at the background of what we have been doing. First, we have brought together over 200 experts during an online meeting, and we discussed whether there is a need to update methodological recommendations. The key conclusion of that meeting was that the document that we currently have is used oftentimes, and our goal was not to entirely rewrite the paper. We just wanted to improve it, polish it, and add some of this in that already used practically to the list of recommendations. And this is the logic that we relied on. On April 29, we met here at this exact venue, and many of you have shared your feedback. We also surveyed 700 communities. We had discussion with the local government authorities, with development agencies, with civil society representatives, utilities companies, over 50 people, and we had an additional survey. So we collected a lot of data. So everything that we're talking about today is based on your feedback. And we were trying to also rely on participatory approach. And today we will be presenting the key change that will come in handy, in our opinion. Now I would like to talk about a few concepts. First, we want strategies to not be huge volumes that just sit on a shelf. The analytical part that currently is 90% of the strategy needs to be shortened. So we are recommending to make it more concise. Other tools that are used currently are not as detailed in the present methodological recommendation. That is why some methodological recommendations probably will end up to be longer. Also, on each stage of the strategic planning, we were thinking about how can we combine strategic, financial, budget planning, spatial papers, etc. This is also one of the key things that we focused on. Now, number 3, on each of the stages, we were trying to take into account the participatory approach, basically involving key beneficiaries to decision development, decision-making process. Also, all of the key policies that also need to be present in the strategies. And another important thing that we have discussed with Tatiana last night is that the analytical part of recommendation focuses on infrastructure. We are counting how many school buildings we have, how many hospitals we have, how many roads we have. But the key thing should not be on infrastructure, but rather services for the population, because infrastructure is only one of the means that allows us to work on certain issues and problems and challenges. And our project focuses on first identifying key services that need to be provided to the population, and then come up with solutions. And we are always saying that development strategy in the EU countries and in Ukraine should be a joint document for the entire community, not only the working document for the local full governance authorities. And this key approach demonstrates the strategies rely on participatory approach, when on every stage we involve local residents, local business, etc. So here you can see the terminology framework. First, we were trying to already improve the terminology that can be found in the recommendations. And I will try to look at it in more detail later on to explain you what is the difference compared to how it used to be in the past. We're looking at the tasks, the indicators. We also did this SWOT analysis of what some things are practically in the context of the participatory approach. We also improved and polished the definition of local stakeholders and beneficiaries. Also added some of the terminology that was absent in recommendations when it comes to strategic planning, and also mentioned the key stages thereof.
We gave some recommendations to the working group. We identified the participatory approach, their cycle, which is 7 years long. Then we talked about external consultants and mapping of stakeholders. And there are two ways how you can look at the strategies. First, it deals with sections and what the strategy should consist of. Next dimension is a procedural framework, and we will try to go through each stage in the strategic planning. First, preparatory stage. We differentiate between working groups for strategy development and implementation. This is useful, but the community can create certainly one working group. We identified how and what this working group can do. Next, enlisting external consultants. We familiarized with many EU practices in Croatia, Poland, France, and we saw that most recommendations actually uses external consultants, but only when institutional capacity of the local community is fairly weak. And in a case like this, external participants should be involved. So we are proposing the approach when external consultants are involved in the strategy development up to the point of implementation. Why? Because communities hire external consultants, but often they don't even know what the document contains, and it usually is shelved. But in our case, if community decides to use external help, this help needs to be used throughout in order to boost institutional capacity. We also recommend that external consultants can become evaluators of the action plan. Another important aspect is action plan. They use this in EU countries very actively, and it is important to ensure at this stage of reporting, which includes evaluation, monitoring, our accomplishments to date, or how much funds we've spent in order to evaluate previous strategy and switch on to the next stage of the next strategy. The new strategy can be brand new, but in our recommendations, we recommend how to improve it. And next, we do mapping of stakeholders and structuring of the same. When we identify stakeholders, we can involve them to the working group or strategic committee. And this is important for SWOT analysis, for public hearings, and also for action plan and involving stakeholders into implementation. Another important story is connecting a development strategy with other important documents. Here, it's important to stay in sync with state documents, regional strategy, and identifying functionality on how regional policy looks at the communities. Now, what's also important is investment planning, because right now in the code, this is one of the key elements of implementing the strategy. It's important to ensure that the investment tasks in the strategy can be moved to the plans. Another important story is the city building documentation, but the development strategy in ideal world should also update city building documentation. Now, regarding the budget documentation, we are saying that this is the key document, and all the targeted programs at the local level, local budgets, should be based on implementing of the development strategy. We also have a huge number of sectoral documents at the local level. Well, there are around 10,000 of them in Ukraine. And these documents should also be synchronized and be made part of the development strategy. And if the community wants to improve their strategy, they need to include this in their action plan. Now, what's also important is that when community starts strategic planning, it should use things like defaults, templates, and there is, for instance, a template to form a working group. And a calendar plan is another thing that is very useful. In our opinion, this calendar plan should include the entire cycle of strategic planning. And it's important that it is synchronized with environmental evaluation and other documents. It should also include investment planning documents. And it is important to foresee this, that the strategic planning process is synchronized so that head of planning knows what's happening.
Це теж насправді може бути однією із ролей цього документа про управління, власне, процесом регіонального розвитку. Так, тепер друга частина.
The second part is the analytical stage. For us, it's very important to switch from the quantity of the text.
Ми бачимо аналітичний етап, який
So
складається.
this analytical stage consists of three main steps. First is collection of data and parameters so that the community can collect all the data that is needed and then describe the key tendencies and characteristics which will become part of the strategy. Here, they should describe how the community is developing, and it's important to list the number of schools and pupils in them. But they should describe also how services are being rendered. They should cover quantitative, qualitative parameters, and based on the state of territorial community, they do the SWOT analysis and select appropriate scenarios. Also, data management is another very important aspect. We added additional sources of data, but under conditions of war, when there are no official statistics, we often have data on mobile operators.
Це набагато точніше відображає кількість населення в територіальній
They reflect the population in the territorial community rather than the data we have in early this year. Kyiv School of Economics are now working with mobile operators in order to understand how many people there are in Ukraine right now. This is also an important source of data. Another important tool is to compare baseline parameters in the community with similar communities and the neighbors. This is convenient so that comparison can be drawn. Next, SWOT analysis, because it looks like you do it and then it's never used. It is part of participatory approach. Therefore, first we map stakeholders. We understand who lives in the community, who those stakeholders are. Then we carry out the SWOT analysis itself, followed by additional sessions to develop additional SWOT analysis, such as thematical subgroups, stakeholder groups, but the population, both public and private sector should be involved, civil society representatives, in order to understand how they see weaknesses and vulnerabilities in the community. And only after that can we say that we've analyzed weaknesses and strong points. You can certainly have several scenarios, positive, negative, etc. And most experts recommend that in order to have a full-scale analysis, you need to spend 1 year, spend lots of resources in order to get the best result. We are going to streamline this because we want to make this scenario part of participatory approach. Now, we are going to use this approach in order to research in dependencies within the SWOT analysis and how strong points can be fortified and how challenges can be turned into opportunities. This will help us combine all of this and help us switch to analytical approach and speak to local community, analyze these things, and then develop operational goals. Thus, we see how preparatory approach is linked to analytical approach. Speaking of planning, according to our logic, the development strategy should not be limited to 7-year planning cycle. because we should ideally cover 1 to 3 planning cycles. But the same is true for strategic goals. We understand that the meaning of parameters is for seven-year cycle, but we want sustainable development. Therefore, we have to follow the logic of certain elements. And if we are planning for 7 years, and then 7 years later, we don't get the result.
Орієнтирами для руху в рамках стратегічного планування. Так, йдемо далі.
Let's move on.
Також ми доопрацювали те, що називається зараз методичних рекомендацій як
Also,
забезпеченням.
we've finished financial support, and we've added here
Публічними
a new reform on public investments.
ситуація, коли зараз на національному рівні
So today, at the national level, we are developing a strategic document, and if community
власні проекти
wants to get funds from
на підставі стратегічних документів національного рівня
strategic documents of national level,
зробила стратегію,
and after developing strategy and projects, to see if they can get it from those.
ми, як громада, дивимося в тому,
We as a community
додатковий план пріоритетних публічних інвестицій держави,
are looking at the single portfolio of the state, because that is additional source to implement our strategy.
запропонувати тимчасовий
Now, what we also suggested is a temporary approach, which is not regulated in the legislation yet, and that is the link between a local development project,
законі про засади державної регіональної
which is part of the law on the foundations of the regional policy, and also in the budget code.
могла б тут бути. Тобто проект місцевого розвитку це власне будь-який
Local development project is any local project.
публічно-інвестиційний проект,
When we talk about public investment project, according to the budget code, this is a project that should be implemented through public investments,
але ми всі з вами чудово
and they appeal to capital investments. But generally, regional policy is not just hospitals, schools, and stadiums, but they also some managerial decisions. It's also about some such as training, for instance, or taking children to a field tour, for instance, or get them linked with other children from other schools, etc.,
формується власне.
to cross-fertilize and exchange experience.
Це до того моменту, поки не буде
So this is up to a point
бажано використання цих всіх
when all these terms are
могла б трошки
made part of the national legislation, national legal framework.
так, рухаємось далі. Про консультативне.
Let's move on. This is a consultative stage.
Це не лише про
We always talk about participatory approach, but it's not just about transparency, but it's also about involving people in the decision-making process. Therefore, it's not just about public hearings, but it's also receiving feedback, comments, and recommendations.
учасницькій парадигмі, як ми його називаємо,
And in participatory paradigm, we need to understand that at the plane, responsibility for certain projects should be shared with private sector or territorial communities.
Завжди буває, коли доходиться до участі громадськості, не залишилося часу.
Ні, справді, це, я тут повернусь. Це
I will try to wrap up soon. We analyzed within our consultations
громад реально додають як співвиконавців, бізнес,
business, public sector. We understand all the risks associated with this, but the development strategy will never become this part of the community.
Це точно має бути відображено в методичних рекомендаціях. І якраз, власне, здається, два останніх слайди.
And I think these are two final slides that I have left. The first one about implementation and evaluation, because now implementation is used only once, and we are planning to say that implementation stage includes a proven strategy, improving plan, and it also includes realization of plans and programs and monitoring. So all of that is encompassed by implementation. And also, we have to take into account that there needs to be project management. We are suggesting to add it. We have already added it, basically. Also, it is important to outline the role of the strategic committee, the work with the beneficiaries, and also outline how can we set priorities. But it is important to always set priorities since resources in the community, same as in the state, are limited. So this should be included into the new version of the methodological recommendations. We have also improved the monitoring mechanism when it comes to indicators in the context of the tasks that are important for public investment. And another thing is that monitoring matters. It is not simply important to measure certain things and measure certain numbers, but to also be able to make amendments. You'll see that on the final slide. And this bridge from monitoring to evaluation, we have also improved and polished it. And the final one is also something that hasn't had enough attention paid to it, the mechanism of making change. So adjustment, when we're talking about some small things, small details that simply need some adjustment, and updating when we are changing something within a certain strategic cycle. But our logic is that the grounds for making this change should be data. So it should be based on monitoring or evaluation. Another thing is, in case there is some emergency or what we have been going through for the last few years in 2022, many strategists started updating their strategies. Well, some of them started updating that back during 2020, during the pandemic, because pandemic had a huge impact on communities. So monitoring, evaluation, and all of the external circumstances that we cannot control can impact any amendments and change made to the strategy. I think this is it. Yes, this is it. So in the end, I would like to say that, yeah, there are many technical things. You can read about it in more detail in the document, for example, using geospatial systems when monitoring. We will share it with you, and we hope that we will improve it. And then the ministry will disseminate it. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Denis. And now I would like to invite everyone to discuss it. So let us discuss it. Let us share our opinions, share our impressions. And I would like to give the floor to 4 offline speakers and 1 speaker online. So Regina Harchenko will be with us, the Deputy Mayor of Zaporizhzhia, and I would like to invite Natalia Khloba, advisor to the Deputy Minister of Communities and Territories Development, expert on strategic planning, to join me on stage here, a member of Alexei's team. Next, Alexander Matsapura, Head of Account Management Department of the Dream Project Office. Next, Irina Starnyanska, Community Development Expert of the Recovery for All Project, and she is a scholar. And Vadim Tabakerga, Director of the Department of Economic Policy of the Lviv Regional Military Administration, the person that has been at least on 2 sides of this, so to say, barricade. Now, Natalia, I'd like to give the floor to you first. Thank you so much for inviting me. Before we start discussing what relates to strategies for territorial communities, I would like to briefly look at the challenges that we all are facing and that we'll be facing in the next cycle 2020-2034, when there will be a new system of the strategic documents. This is a period for Ukraine that's going to be very special. It is not going to be similar to any strategic cycles in the EU member states or in other developed countries. And Ukraine has never experienced anything like that ever in its history. First, what makes this period peculiar is that this cycle might be happening within three scenarios. The first one is amid war. We predict that the war will be over. Of course, Ukraine will be the winner. Then we will join the EU and will obtain access to the European structural funds. And it will lead to change in our lives, in the lives of our communities. And the third alternative scenario is the post-war scenario. So people might think that when the war is over, we will go back to what we used to have in 2021, but that's not the case. There will be a very different post-war situation. And we don't know when it will be over, because following long-lasting wars, it sometimes takes countries decades to recover. But on the other hand, there are some examples when countries only needed a few years to recover post-war. And then the peaceful development comes. Country is like a living organism. And it cannot stop existing, like a living organism cannot live, then die for a few years, and then come back to life. No, the country keeps living. This is a continuous process. So throughout the entire cycle, now, when we're still at war, we need to plant the seeds for the future peaceful development, for the future flourishing. Lay the groundwork for future successful life of Ukraine. Because if we do not do important things for our children and grandchildren to have successful lives, it will mean that all the people dying in the front line currently in vain. But we have to lay the proper groundwork. And we have to walk this very thorny path. And this peculiarity shows us an entire spectrum of challenges that Ukraine is facing. There is a very complicated territorial topology. We have functional territories that are defined by the function, be it a rural territory or urban territory. So basically, I'm talking about traditional topology, but there is also safety and security factor that needs to be taken into account. And this forces us to break territories down into macro regions. Maybe when the new cycle starts, we'll have yet another topology. And this makes things more complicated. We are only beginning to introduce digital tools. And by the way, one more peculiarity is that this period that starts in 2028
період життя в епоху штучного інтелекту.
will also coincide with the life during the era of artificial intelligence, because we are now entering the new period of humanity's development. In 2028, as a humanity, as a society,
Що попереду? І як нам жити? Це
we will be thinking about how do we live in this reality, because AI will change many things in our life.
цифрові інструменти тільки впроваджуємо. І
And we are only starting to introduce our digital tools, and they will keep evolving.
в нашому розпорядженні. Бо нам було б
And we're not yet using them to their fullest.
не за допомогою свот-аналізу вираховували
It would have been much easier if we didn't have to rely on SWOT analysis,
просто потік даних,
but rather have a flow of data
і ми б бачили ці
which would allow us to see all the trends
а нам їх ще потрібно ідентифікувати.
so that we would not have to waste time to identify it manually.
Величезні
So when we bring all of these things together, we see that we are facing a huge challenge.
займаємось інкорпорацією у стратегування.
And we're only starting to incorporate public investment to the strategy, which is something that all the EU member states are very used to. They have been doing that for years now. But we are only beginning to do that.
Оце все я хочу сказати.
And to conclude, I would like to say that
Це наступний період
the next period will be different,
складності.
since the degree of difficulty will be very different. Life is becoming more difficult, and Ukrainians are going through very difficult times. And the second thing is unbelievable uncertainty that we are facing.
Зараз мова йде про глобальну невизначеність.
And now I'm talking about the global uncertainty that the entire humanity is facing. No one can tell what awaits us. The time
Економічного прогнозування.
when we could use economic forecasting to analyze the future are gone. It will not work now. But
Просто піковими
Ukraine
невизначеностями
is at the summit of uncertainty,
зроблена
and only good quality strategic papers
відповіддю на цю
can help us respond to this uncertainty, respond to this uncertain future. This is one of the reasons of why we require strategies.
жива істота.
Because imagine we're like a living organism, we're in a fog, in a mist,
Робимо таке припущення, можуть
and we're making assumptions. What is ahead of us? It can be a swamp, it can be a forest,
не бачимо в нас
but we cannot see any of it because there is this fog of uncertainty, and there is a very
а куди ми йдемо.
uncertain landscape ahead of us, and we need to make a decision. Which direction are we heading in?
Той самий пристрій, яким
And we need a device,
для того, щоб йти
a device that will help us to understand which direction we should head in.
того, що ми
Now.
всі почули. По-перше, дякую.
First of all, I would like to thank for very substantial and deep analysis
Стратегічного планування на рівні
of strategic planning at the level of communities that we already have.
стільки аспектів, так багато.
It covers so many various aspects, and so many things are changing at the moment
Для того, щоб просто розповісти людям,
that we will not have enough time
що
to tell people about every single comment and every single thing that we suggested. That is why, as a speaker, I would like to emphasize a few extremely important things. First,
повернутися до проблеми.
I'd like to go back to the issue of analytical part. Usually, people write instructions for outside people,
Якась людина, яка не знає
so that a person who does not know anything about your community can read some instruction and find out something about it.
реагування, довідник
When it comes to strategies, you don't need an instruction.
реагування
When you come to strategies, analytical part is needed since it is a source of data, so that you can identify your own potential first and foremost, because to develop you need potential. You need the soil that you're going to grow from. Second, you needed to identify the obstacles that are holding you back, obstacles that need to be removed. And this identification is happening based on the data. And this analytical part, and this is a part that relies on data collection, since it allows you to identify trends. That is why you need to see how data is evolving. You don't need to count how many hospitals you have. You need to look at how many people the hospital has treated. You have to look at the quality of treatment. You have to look at the quality of education, in case we're looking at the schools and educational facilities, to understand how things are evolving and where you're headed. Next, the presentation mentions this thing that I'm about to talk about, and it is also mentioned in the analytical data, but there is not enough time to talk about that enough. I am talking about handling risks. And I want the leadership of the communities to understand that. You first have to understand the difference between a challenge, a threat, and a risk. These are three different notions, because a challenge is like a task that you need to work on. We are joining the EU. This is our assignment. Assignment that can be solved. Another challenge is a climate change. This is not yet a threat. So our task is to adapt to climate change. A threat is a source of harm that someone from outside can do us. And a risk is a possible event when we assess its possibility, its likelihood, and we know which conclusions it's going to result in, which consequences it's going to bring. For example, a threat of a shelling can result in a person losing their life. This is a consequence. And since we are being shelled every day, we understand the likelihood. And working on this risk, we are building shelters and we're introducing other measures. So this is a work with risk. The risks are huge and they are of utmost importance. When implementing a strategy, if you don't do proper work on this aspect, it most likely will lead to divergence from the strategy and it results in us adjusting it all the time. And one more thing. I want to emphasize why it is important to engage stakeholders. This is not a requirement from the EU. This is a very simple truism. Building future relies on vision, and vision is how people that build view things. My experience of working with business demonstrates that over the last 30 years, it was happening in front of me. First, people used to go to experts and ask them to develop a strategy for them. The experts would come, develop strategy, and sometimes those strategies were amazing and highly professional. The strategies would go in a drawer and the business would just keep working the way it used to work even before the strategy was developed. Why was that the case? Because people who are making decisions are looking at it with their own eyes. And when an outsider comes, they are looking at it from a different perspective. But people who have to implement the strategy have a different perspective. Community strategy will be implemented by the entire community, not only by the leadership, not only by the local governance. And the more you involve people,
The more ways you can find to involve the community, starting from the vision, the better. Because each community member has its own vision. And what you put into the action, into the strategy, it should be the cumulative vision of everyone in the community. So you need to try and preserve that snapshot, the snapshot of the entire community, the snapshot that would reflect the opinion and the views of that community. If you succeed in doing that, then the entire community will be implementing the strategy as one single unit. Thank you, Natalia. We never agreed on risks, by the way. One of my favorite topics in strategic planning is that we all planned this. Now let's evaluate what our threats are, what the challenges are, and how realistic our plans are. By the way, I forgot to say something about threats. Whenever you develop the strategy, remember that part of the threats, threats and opportunities, it's not within the community. They are external. Threats always come from outside. Because actually, in most strategies that I read, it's all mixed up. Thank you very much, Natalia. Please stay with us. We continue our discussion. Let's have Regina Harchenko from Zaporizhia. She listened to our first part. Regina, hello, we see you. She's acting mayor of Zaporizhia and secretary of the city council. Hello, can you hear me? I interrupted our working group on the statute. I took notes and the differences between threats and opportunities, and I agree that indeed our vision is our future. I agree with that. Thank you for inviting me. Due to multiple tasks, I couldn't make it to Kyiv. Nevertheless, thank you for remembering us. Of course, I understand we need to grow up, because the concept that someone will come and save us and build for us and give us lots of money, it doesn't work. Yesterday, we had with the ministry, and as you know, that we're now preparing for URC, and communities are now fighting to make it there so that they're represented. But everyone is saying that one way or another, in terms of strategic stories, funds is basically the blood and the air that the community can breathe. So if we talk about attracting foreign investments and developing the cities, and each city has their own threats, etc., this is an investment component, and international partners want to also to receive the benefits from working with our community. So we are working on this. We're preparing. Now, as far as strategy is concerned, we developed our strategy until 2030. I'm not sure whether it's still valid. And to be honest with you, we mostly deal with housing, IDPs, rebuilding the destroyed buildings after overnight shelling, etc. In other words, we have our hands full of other things. So it's not like we have much spare time to think about strategy until 2030. So our main strategy is to survive today and be ready to help people who have suffered the after effects of shelling, who may have been left without housing, etc. And of course, the strategy after the war will certainly be energy efficient, energy independent. And you know, Kharkiv is working on this. We are working on this because we understand that a centralized system of power supply and heat supply is incapable. Therefore, we are actively installing cogeneration units. We're using renewables actively, solar panels, wind mills, etc. So, but this is part of our survival story. We're trying to build also safe locations for children of various ages. We are building new shelters and modular blocks for hospitals underground because, as you know, in Zaporizhia, we also cater not only to civilians in our hospitals, but also the military. So there's also strategic story of survival, and of course the energy, independent energy, which will become an attractive factor both for communities and for business. Because if electricity here is cheaper than in other regions, this reduces the cost of products and therefore makes this location more attractive for the business community. The same is true for foreign partners, foreign investors. So we understand no one's going to save us. We have to save ourselves. So thank you for your vision, because sometimes in our context, in a daily routine, can we stop here and talk a bit more about vision? Because in the first part, you clearly showed the difference in agenda between communities near the front line as well as communities in the western parts of Ukraine, for example, where they have no issue with power supply. So taking into account that you are located very close to the front line, the same is true for Kharkiv. Did you have any thoughts and discussions regarding strategic planning? Because it seems to be equal for everyone. Methodological recommendations are also similar, but they are very much differ in their situations. And of course, we perhaps should make it optional for some regions and mandatory for others. Well, in my personal opinion, Zaporizhia needs to become a fortress city. And even when peace comes, we will still be a fortress city. We will still have lots of military units. I mean, it can't be any other way, because nobody wants to be in the shoes of Mariupol. Now, as far as business is concerned, we have lots of relocated businesses. Do we need additional tax benefits or some other interesting things which would stimulate and motivate businesses to create jobs? Yes, sure. Can this become optional to us? Yes. Could we perhaps get some subsidies at the budget level? Again, good idea. Should we be more inclusive at schools, in healthcare system? Yes, because the legislation, like the main national legislation, it is not flexible enough because the regions that are very close to the front line, they require certain leeway. They need to be treated slightly differently. People find it very difficult to live here. I mean, it takes a hero to live here. Regarding your action plan, because you have things like global failure, for example, or global destruction, this may affect the success of your strategy implementation. Do you have any thoughts or practice, experience that where you need to fine-tune things and be creative about something and what impact it has on strategic planning? Well, actually, it's a debatable thing, but what we're trying to do is strike a balance between what you need to do today and to what degree you can aspire to be in line with expectation at the national level. If we look at the strategy until 2030, we understand that it's not topical because you can't calculate the threats and risks and plan how many pupils we will have in territorial community, say in early 2026, and what recommendations we will see coming from the Ministry of Education, for example, or how many schools we have to shut down, etc. So it is general vision, but implementing it, so much depends on the local situation, local circumstances. So, I mean, we are sort of moving in the right direction, but it is largely obsolete. Well, experience shows that we're never giving up on our goals and tasks, but we do have a feeling that it will take longer. We need more time to implement it. Okay, thank you, Regina, very much, and hope you will hear lots of interesting and useful things for Zaporizhia. And we'd like to thank you for sharing your thoughts, because our goal is to develop a methodology that will be easy to understand for all communities, because we don't want communities who say this is unacceptable for us because we're located on the border with the EU, and some other community, such as yours, for instance, in Zaporizhia, it's no good for us because we are on the almost on the front line. Now, I'd like to give the floor to Alexander Matsakura. You've heard the topics that we discussed, and this is very much up your street. But we're not really focusing on communities at the front line, because the entire Ukraine is suffering from airstrikes, etc. But there are even technical things. What questionnaires, what forms should be included in the documentation? Because we insist that planning for the communities, which includes both public sector and private sector, and private sector is often featured in the plans of communities, so we need to be mindful of this. Thank you. Indeed, there are quite a few challenges, because Ukraine finds itself in a unique situation, and we need to take into account the location of communities and what sectors are part of the plan. We can look back on 2023 when goals were set by IMF. In 2024, movement sped up. Then in 2025, we had resolutions by the Cabinet of Ministers. And since then, we started to work actively with developed strategies. Both national level, we have 18 sectors of economy and 15 sectoral ministries. So, which includes Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, Regional Development. They all met with each sectoral ministry and looked at their strategic documents. Each ministry has their own strategic document, of course, but whether this matches the factor and the current practice To be honest, these are first approaches. At least it's not always the case.
So if we're talking about the sectoral strategy, it didn't always coincide. So the ministry did not always rely on strategic documents. Well, sometimes there were orders, sometimes there were conceptual papers. Denis probably saw many of such papers, and they were slightly different for every sector. Yes, this is a challenge. This is a challenge also for the coming years, because this needs to be changed and adjusted so that all of it is more or less similar, so that all the documents are relevant and approved. Because another challenge was that ministries were making their suggestion to the midterm investment plan, which forms the part of the public investment management reform. And these strategies start in 2023 and they last until 2025 or 2026. Well, probably in the current context, this is something that we need to rely on. Because yes, you need to develop something new, but we're talking about a very short time frame. For those people from the ministries who are responsible for policy in a certain domain. That is why these documents need to be updated, we need to work on them. But if the strategy ends in 2026 and the midterm plan is 3 years plus 1, then it is a pretty huge challenge for this sector. Now, if we're talking about where we are at the moment, in the coming weeks, from what I understand, there will be a meeting of the Strategic Investment Council, and they will be developing the midterm plan for public investment. Then the relevant bodies and structures in the ministry will be creating their projects, relying on the priorities set by the government. This demonstrates that there is a huge need in funding. There is a huge need in public investment. But given the current context, for example, let's take a fiscal frame, the budget declaration, it is not limitless. The state needs to look at the priorities. Obviously, each minister is going to say that this is a priority and this is not a priority, but all of these things need to be implemented, and this is true. But since there is a fiscal framework, aside from the governmental and strategic, we need to properly think about what is a top priority. Yes, everything is a priority, but still, we need to find a top priority among those other priorities when it comes to public investment. After that, the midterm plan for public investment should be developed for regional and local level too. And challenges come up at these two levels too. Let us take a look at the 15 ministries that are responsible for 18 various sectors. We have over 1,000 communities, if I'm not mistaken. About 1,300 are working in DREAM. So there should be over 1,000 strategies, plus 25 strategies at the regional level. So the approach needs to be different. And as the colleagues from the Ministry of Communities and Territories Development have mentioned, approximately 90% of strategies at the regional level are approved. 10% still needs to be finalized, and I think that this is a pretty good result. Imagine 25 strategies. This is a big number, and these are pretty bulky documents. And this is something that needs months, if not years of work. And now, if we're going down to the level of communities, it's going to be even more segmented because we have so many communities. And from what I'm aware of, the strategies are being developed there. I believe that about 80% are already at the final stage. Well, we're gonna see the actual result pretty soon. But at the same time, the communities, same as regional administrations, also have the comprehensive plan for recovery. I don't remember the exact name. Yeah. And this is the document that probably should be used, that you should read. But the focal point should be the strategic document, the strategic approach. And taking all of that into account, this needs to be worked in. We had to work on it previously, we still have to work on it. On the one hand, this is a huge challenge. But we need to work on it, we need to develop it, we need to analyze our strategies. It's a topic for a separate discussion, because you can be good at developing the strategy, but you not be that good at finding an assignment that you need to work on first. This is like a separate skill. There can be a very good, very well polished document, but as experience shows, many enterprises, many communities and ministries could have very well developed strategic documents. And I'm talking about 5-6 years ago, before the full-scale invasion. And these documents could just stay on a table, stay on a desk. They could have been developed by PwC, Ernst & Young, very costly documents that people read once and never applied them in practice, because no one knew how to turn it all into practice. And if you ask people, do you have a strategy? They would always reply, yes, we do have a strategy. But they didn't know how to implement it, how to turn it into reality. And this is also poses a separate challenge. Thank you so much, Alexander. I hope we're using the word challenge in a correct way in this context, because actually all the communities are expecting that the reform of public investment management will result in all these 1,300 accounts in DREAM and DREAM Academy that you have launched, and all the tools that exist in the space will help us see the practical results that have been implemented by these 1,300 communities. And so that we start building a bridge between a DREAM, public investment, and strategic planning, so that communities start obtaining some resource. And that will serve as an indicator that will show whether we actually are good at implementing that. Number of communities, number of projects, number of initiatives implemented. Thank you so much, Alexander. And now let us give the floor to Irina Sornyanska. She's community development expert of the Recovery for All project. She's a scholar. She is a person who is both a practitioner who worked in the field and as a theorist. So could you please now comment on what you have heard from other speakers, and on the other hand also also give your feedback about the presentation that was made. Thank you so much, Alexander. Greetings, colleagues. To be honest, there are a few thoughts that I would like to share. So first, I can second what has been already mentioned by my colleagues, but on the other hand, there are some things that I don't exactly agree with. But I would like to emphasize three tendencies that for my vision, that I see in practice and in theory. And Denis' presentation just confirmed my assumptions. What am I talking about? Currently, we have a very clear request coming from the communities. They want good quality strategies, not just a strategy that's going to stay on a shelf, on a desk, on a table, developed by someone, but a quality document that will set the groundwork for midterm planning, public investment, etc. If it is just some kind of a vision, it will not allow them to do that, since it will not lay the proper foundation for this. And I would like to share the following opinion. I'm deeply convinced that the grounds for a good paper is a very good analytical work. And please listen to me careful. I'm not talking about the analytical part of the strategy. I am talking about analytical work, assessing and evaluating the community. We need to do that even before we start working on the strategy. We cannot develop strategy without relying on anything. We cannot develop strategy without understanding the conclusions. We cannot develop the strategy without understanding the various layers of data that we have. Why is that important for Ukrainian communities? Last time, if you remember, one of the main things that was mentioned is the absence of verified statistical qualitative data. Now, one more thing. We should all understand that all communities are newly created. So they do not have a lot of data. They do not have a good base. And one more thing. In this context, it is very hard for us to have these layers of data that we can overlap. For example, the number of 1,400 students in a community does not tell me anything. Is it 1,400 out of 20,000 total population, 30,000 total population, or 40,000 total population? And I also need to understand which share of the students go to the local school and which share of the students go to an adjacent community school. And this is what I would need to do my job properly. And here I second what Denise has mentioned. It is very important for us to separate these things. We are supposed to have the community's profile. It should be an annex to the strategy, but we need to have it, even if it's going to be a larger document. And also have to have an analytical part of the strategy that should include conclusions that are valuable for us when it comes to goal setting. And then we're gonna have the entire set of important documents. Now, by the way, when Denise was speaking, I could very clearly trace this vision of RFI project, and before that search project that was also developing strategies. And I would like to say that last year, Search project has supported 14 communities when they were developing their strategies in 7 regions. So there was a pretty large pilot. The communities were very, very different. Some of them located close to Kyiv, so pretty urbanized, some rural in the middle of nowhere. And as Tanya said, maybe the number of communities does not seem to be large, but believe me, this is sufficient to test methodology suggested by RFI. And these segues to the recommendation that were mentioned today. An RFI project carried out deep analysis and need assessment. And it wasn't just a general type analysis. They selected 4 sectors, main sectors for each community: healthcare, social services, education, and of course, economy. We cannot omit that one. And in these sectors, for each of the sectors, they did very good in-depth interviews, opinion surveys, statistical analysis, data verification. What does it do? It basically allows you to see the needs of local residents. For example, there was a very positive oral assessment of social services. In one of the communities, it turned out that there was a group of people
маломобільні групи мешканців, вони не можуть отримати.
People with low mobility cannot access those services. So in general, it seems to be pretty positive, but there is a small share of local residents who do not have access to these services. And there are many such examples in various sectors. But what am I getting at? These need assessments became very good foundation. Next, a very important thing that was mentioned today too is that the strategy and this analytical work is not about infrastructure, but about services that need to be provided. Again, let's take example of another community. The education was assessed very highly by the local governance. But when you talk to the residents, when you dig deeper, you start understanding that residents leave this community because there is no offline education. They're willing to move outside of this community so that people can get access to better education. And when we are comparing infrastructure versus services, you know, when Denise was talking about that, I could see a graph that I recommend to everyone to use that allows you to very clearly compare infrastructure versus services. Use one graph and put expenses per one student in a community versus knowledge obtained. For example, test results. And you'll see that those graphs, they're not moving in parallel, that they even sometimes meet in a certain point, because one is about infrastructure and the other one is about the quality of the services. And this is precisely why we need to talk about the quality, about the needs of the services, and only then talk about infrastructure and how the service can be provided. Now, one more aspect that I fully agree with. And the participatory approach that RFA relied on. Let's be honest, in Ukraine, we do not have the culture of joint discussion of issues. Oftentimes, we come across communities when these meetings that are happening with expert involvement or that are facilitated by the experts become a first when people get together to discuss something. To not complain about the local governance, to tell them how bad they are. Even that happened too. There were instances like that, right? When we organize this kind of meetings. But these are very good examples of when people get engaged. Yes, it is true. And I don't tend to think that the strategy developed with engagement of the citizens will become something that they will start implementing starting next month. No, it still will be the local government authorities implementing the strategy. And this is how it is supposed to be done according to the law. But at the very least, this will allow us to build trust. And this is a European value that we should work on. Well, I can keep talking about the first trend for hours, but the second trend that we should also mention is that today we already have a very clear understanding the strategies don't only need to be developed, that someone also needs to implement them so that they don't just sit on a desk. Do the communities understand that? Not always. We also saw communities who are ready to develop strategies but are not yet ready to assume responsibility for implementation thereof. So we understand that we need to do something, but are we ready to do that? Not always. But again, this is something that the local authorities are responsible for. RFA probably was one of the first projects that decided to help implement strategies. By the way, this increases the degree of responsibility because the expert does not simply develop and leaves. No, they stay with the community and also keeps replying to various questions that the community might have. What am I talking about? At the very least, In the current methodological recommendations, you will not find anything about how the body should be established, in what format, is it an advisory body or not, how the meetings are supposed to happen, some basic things that RFA is working with. And this also is now very clearly traced in these recommendations.
Now, what I would also like to add here, and communities have already appreciated this, we're not only talking about logistical support to strategy implementation, but we're actually jointly searching for money in order to implement the ideas from the community action plan. We are now supporting creation of the project offices, and this is a good tradition. And the third trend, and this is to monitor, evaluate, and update changes. A couple of weeks ago, the Department for Economic Policy in Lviv shared their findings on how communities are doing in Lviv region, and there's only one community in Lviv region monitoring strategy implementation. Everyone has developed a strategy, but only one community is monitoring its implementation. You see, because communities don't understand why do this. What's the point? And the idea is to update, to improve and introduce changes. Because if a new challenge comes up, you have to adapt, you have to fine-tune. So I think this will step up, and I think eventually communities will understand the point behind this. Anyway, in our methodological recommendations, we're doing this, and it's all there. Thank you.
Вадиме, власне, я вибив тобі слово.
Vadim, now you have the floor,
Ти також чув повністю весь цикл, всю
but
презентацію.
you've heard all the presentation, and you have the practice
Ну і також
and experience.
маєш погляд на це з позиції трошки вище.
Plus, you can see this from the standpoint sort of above communities. Indeed, it is unfortunate that we don't have enough time for this. Out of 73 communities in Lviv region, 60 have approved their strategies, but only 21 of them meet methodological recommendations of 2022. That was approved by the ministry. I'll speed up. It took us a long time to develop strategies in the communities, and in the meantime, some communities realize they cannot live without strategies. Why? Because they understand why, or rather how one could live without the budget. They expect new state tools to support regional policy, and they want these to be done correctly. They understand that the structure of the strategy need to meet certain parameters. They need to tie their goals with the goals of the region, etc. But everyone at the end is asking, but what about funds? Will we get funds to implement these strategies? You see, this is a rather primitive vision because they view the strategy as a way of positioning themselves to present themselves in the best of light vis-a-vis the investors, plus make themselves part of the overall national context. Recently, we received an offer regarding the national territories, and we saw that 26 out of 73 they are kind of outside regarding functional type of territory. So each community want to see themselves somewhere, either in the mountainous territory, on the agglomeration, or borderline, etc. But they want to belong in some sort of niche. So I thank community to listen to our proposals, and the community that is Lviv agglomeration, they say, if I am part of Lviv agglomeration, will I get more funds, or will I be considered to be quite wealthy and therefore I'll have to share my funds with someone else? And we don't have answers for them. So I like that the fact that the government is now trying to see what each neighbor is planning, because we have three mountainous regions, for example, three communities within this region, and they have highly specialized medical facilities, for example, oncological clinical centers, etc., that require investments. So it's a major task to systemize their strategies at the level of community, region, the state, synchronize it with the budget process and the public investment plans. It's an uphill battle. So we want these methodological recommendations to contain references to how all of this can be agreed. Communities cannot be in a vacuum, and it should be territorial community, and also for the facilities of the local capacity, because, for example, if a community has a park or a national sanctuary or a university, they don't invite the managers and the administrators of these facilities. When we went to Germany, a local mayor said that he's asking government to have the vocational training facility and he gets more students this way because students will travel from other communities, and this will make his community grow. So in our methodological recommendations, apart from formal agreements between local community, region, and the state, they need to apply these mundane things. And what's also important is we need to take into account business interests, because if they have mountain ski resorts, depending on how that is developed by the business, the local community will get employment or they will be redundant. So this has to be done in sync. It has to be done in a comprehensive manner, holistically. When we traveled with experts from other projects and talked to local community activists and councillors, we understood that in the process of strategic planning, they've changed the vision on how the community should be developed. It is important to understand that we have quality analytical data on how community can be developed. It's a plan that each community should adhere to. Now, all 73 communities should have quality strategies, all 73 of them in the Lviv region, but they shouldn't just sit there on paper. They need to be put into action. Thank you, Vadima. Thank you, Vadima. Vadim, in the past, demonstrated the best results for strategy development and implementation in Lviv region across Ukraine, and Lviv region was the front runner in this process, even before it became mandatory for all communities across Ukraine. They were volunteers at the time, and they were the front runners. Now we have experts in our room here with us. Should you have a question or a comment to make, just raise your hand and we'll pass on the mic to you. Many people have joined us online, so just let us know. Hello, I'm Andriy Fedotov. I work in IMO. Thank you for your ideas on improving methodological recommendations. We are in the middle of the documentary festival, and there they showed a film about strategic planning in Chile. And there were protests, people were campaigning for new constitution, they developed a very good plan, but the public was against this. Even though they met all the requirements and they involved the minorities, it was transparent, etc. So the reason I'm mentioning this is, how do we make these strategies in the epicenter of attention so that the general public accepts this and appreciates this?
побудови компромісу, як знайти спільну мову.
It's also about building compromises,
Не просто почути їх думку, а справді.
how to involve various stakeholders.
Не знаю, якщо у вас є якісь рефлексії щодо цього.
If you have some questions, it would be interesting.
Стратегію треба сприймати дуже
Because strategy needs to be taken seriously for it to work.
Перша подяка за це запитання.
Thank you, Andriy.
От я зараз дам можливість, почуємо ще інші коментарі з залу, і тоді дам можливість відрефлексувати на питання, які звучать з залу.
I'd like,
В рамках підготовки цього аналізу і в рамках підготовки цих пропозицій.
as part of preparing for these consultations, we interviewed experts and specialists, and Andriy was in fact one of those experts who provided their feedback, and all of their ideas were one way or another incorporated into the process of strategic planning. That's why we consider this was a wholly inclusive process. Who's next? Please pass on the mic.
До вас принесли мікрофон, а ви тікаєте.
Доброго дня, Віктор Нестеренко, Центр
Hello, I'm Viktor Nesterenko.
Ну, дивіться, як розглядається практично, дуже чудово.
In practice,
Приїжджаєш в громаду, стратегічне
you know,
планування,
you come to a community,
прийшли люди, начальники відділів.
people come, head of department, activists, but they're sad
Ще декілька речей.
because a few things are missing.
Люди в зоні
First of all, people
них все влаштовує. Є за-
are within the comfort zone, they have salaries, they have jobs,
Далі,
a 9 to 5,
з моєї точки зору,
everything's fine.
зараз
Secondly,
кадрів. Тому що люди почали
HR
планувати, вони мають
and staff training is not sufficient.
розуміти, що на цьому
To do strategic things, you have to think strategically. And if they're not doing anything right, they have to have doubt.
на жаль, ми більшість
And only those who are highly trained can have
нічого не змінюється.
doubts.
Коли із стіл той самий.
Everyone else, they just don't care.
Стратегічно планувати,
They don't see the difference.
що може бути.
Also, to plan strategically, people need to understand
І переважній більшості селищ
what
рад
could be.
може бути практично. Кейси просто практичні.
And
Останні там пару
most people don't realize
днів спілкувався
what is possible. I spoke to Sumy region
Закарпатської області.
and Transcarpathian region.
Знають, що таке
In neither region, they don't have
може працювати і
idea about
громади немає
medical guarantees system.
на забезпечення.
They have no idea what this is.
Та це взагалі треш.
Education is even worse.
Ми вже 11 років займаємося реформою.
We've been doing the reform for 11 years.
Вчителів, які
We
мають
still don't have a system of training teachers who have strategic thinking.
У нас немає слова взагалі.
It doesn't exist.
Якщо брати про
Next,
багато громад
many communities
чекають інвестора,
are searching for investors, etc.
якщо приїде до них інвестор,
But even if investor comes with $2 million, it won't work because
краще для громади це
they need staff. And the best way of going about this is if they raise young generation who will open business.
Скажи перше, коротеньке, як вони при такій відвертості тебе там в громадах все одно терплять і запрошують?
How do they invite you when you are so direct and transparent?
Твої громади прямо в зоні
And also, your communities are very close to the front line. Are there any aspects that we need to be mindful of?
ну, якщо казати про громади Харківщини, ти сам про це
Speaking of Kharkiv region
зараз треба
communities,
саме
what needs to be done
тим, що йде вигорання,
is to protect them from burnout,
на дня чекаєш на смерть. Я цього
because when you are expecting a death every day, you know, you burn out very quickly. After Kharkiv, last night, I slept like a log. because what happened last night in Kyiv is just trifles compared to what's going on in Kharkiv. It's all relative. So community needs to rebuild. Kupiansk, Vovchansk, and other territories, Izum. If this happens, communities will start to work. Our major problem is that we would like to return people back. I'm talking about the ones who migrated within Ukraine, as well as the ones who went abroad. And we're trying to encourage them to return.
So what should we do at the national level so that at the level of all 1,469 communities, so that when people come, they can also do strategy? Well, my suggestion is having a working group and strategic committee, right? And it should have the same people. So it shouldn't be two different groups of people, in my opinion. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, see? Even though we didn't agree about it earlier, yes, we couldn't discuss it earlier on, but some people are preparing the strategy and doing the analysis. And I think Irina also mentioned that when she was making her speech. Vadim also mentioned that. Denis also mentioned that. What is the role of those advisors and experts and stakeholders, as well as people who are suggesting their projects? Okay, Vitaly, we'll give you the floor soon. I'd like to remind our participants we have to wrap up, but I would like to ask you for 10 more minutes of your time so that we can properly end the event, collect all of your opinions and comments. Okay, 10 more minutes. The coffee is going to stay there. No one's going to drink it before we come there. Hi. Vitaly, expert on communities development, and I will be very quick. The presentation of your approaches and tools means that they should be new. Does the methodology take into account the fact that there is a war ongoing and no one on planet Earth can give you an exact date when it's going to be over? So can we think about planning for 7 upcoming years? Or maybe we should probably now talk about 1 to 2 months of planning and 3 months of forecasting. This is just a suggestion, but I would like to hear your opinion. And my second question, methodological recommendations. This word combination, can these recommendations, we're talking about it as if this is an instruction. It has been written in the ministry, have been involved experts from multiple international projects, and that it should be something that the head of the community relies on solely. In my opinion, it should be different. This should be recommendations. The word recommendation is a key here. Then they can approach it creatively in the community, because I can give you multiple examples. Yeah, it is true that probably we do not have experts in the communities or heads, but I can also give you multiple examples, practical examples, when people do have all the necessary skills. And whatever that we are suggesting from Kyiv level, we're not taking that into account because we simply do not see all of the details. We do not understand all of the subtleties that certain community has, again, given the huge number of the communities and how diverse they are. Thank you so much. And I see another person raising a hand and one more person raising a hand. Okay, so there are 4 people that I can see, and then we are gonna wrap up and give the floor for the comments. Hi, Andrei Ponder from Live Institute, and thank you for everything that you have done. Yeah, thank you. I have one question. I was planning to ask 3, but given that we are out of time, what's next? Here we have government representatives. There are people who worked in methodological recommendations. And to add to Vitaly's question, what happens with it next? What will the government do with that? Is it going to turn into methodological recommendation or methodological recommendation with some creative component? It is already month of June, and smaller communities can already start planning. You did a very good job, and I would like first hear the opinion of the government, whether they're willing to start working with that, because at the onset of the discussion, they said, let us simplify and let us combine integrated development strategies and investment plans. But methodological recommendations relate to strategy mostly. It doesn't mention spatial planning and investment plans. That is why I would like to hear the response to understand the connectivity between the two sessions that we had and understand what are our next steps. Wow. It looks that out of the three questions that you have asked, the third question goes to Grigory, and we're going to give the mic to him now. Well, I wanted to also cover spatial planning. Grigori Melnichuk from Kyiv Aviation University, Dean of the Architecture Department. What Vitaly has said about strategy being regulated or unregulated. Currently, the ministry, in my opinion, views it as a piece of the system of regional policy. There is this vertical, and then we should be speaking about a more formal approach to strategy development. Basically, there is a path that the urban planning documentation went through. There is a list of various requirements, there is external expert assessment and evaluation, and lots of various technical requirements. And this is a formal planning document. Now, the other side is informal planning documents. Well, maybe the community does not necessarily have to develop planning documents that are mentioned in the law. This is a document of informal planning, and you can be creative when it comes to it, but the ministry in this case does not assume responsibility for the quality of this document and for its content. And when it comes to strategic planning, we have methodological recommendations, but in spatial planning, we have the order for approval, development, so recommendations and the order. Thank you so much. Grigory, now let us give the mic for the final remark, and then I'm going to give the mic to the speakers so that they can comment upon any of the questions. Good afternoon. Luhansk Office of National Academy of Science. I have a question regarding occupied communities in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson Oblast. What are we going to do with these communities? What are the options for them in the context of this methodological recommendations? And when it comes to strategic planning for these territories, are we talking about them too, or are we just omitting them? Thank you so much, Ina. Thank you. I have a question regarding taking into account these communities when we are doing strategic planning. Are there going to be any incentives or some motivation so that communities are willing to collaborate? Because our experience shows that every rural community wants to collaborate with the urban community, but it is not the case if it's the other way around. Okay, and I'm gonna ask our speakers to pick whichever of the questions that they deem relevant, and you have 1 to 2 minutes to respond to those comments and questions. And from what I understand, some of them were addressed to the organizers, so I'm going to comment on them later. Well, first, I would like to comment the question that has to do with some pretty complicated things when it comes to do with how the strategic documents are structured. Well, on the one hand, you're right. We are talking about a formal relationship between various groups of documents. The system of strategic planning as a systemic phenomenon. And that is why subordinates and rules, other things
правового унормованого
Well,
інституту.
basically, it's like that at any legal institution. And there is a surplus, an obvious surplus that demonstrates that it is overly complicated. And this is what Vitaly mentioned, that we're trying to simplify this process.
Ви ж коли пропонуєте
When you are suggesting something informal,
наприклад, стратегії громад є
for example,
неформальної точки зору.
viewing the community strategies from an informal perspective,
Розумієте,
we should understand there is a trap in this. You see, the system of strategic planning,
місце займають стратегії громад.
we should understand what is the place for these strategies for development of communities. This is the root of the tree. This is the most important part of it. Because without having proper community strategies, you will not be able to build proper regional strategies. And the strategy that needs to be based on strategic vision and development at the regional level cannot be artificially created at the national level without having proper data and information from the regional level. And all of these relates to one another. That is why requirements to quality and reliability of information lay the groundwork, well, that the entire success of the entire strategic planning system depends on. On the other hand, recommendations is the proper word for strategies at the community level, because community always has certain degree of liberty when it comes to it. But community should take into account the main concepts at the regional level, strategic goals, priorities, operational goals, and at the same time, the region has also to coordinate it with them. And basically, this is a two-way street. The top level takes information from the lower level and demands it to be reliable, and vice versa. The lower level also relies on priorities and other things from the higher level. That is why we need to strike a balance that we're constantly looking for. The task in architecture is about balancing and finding this balance, and this is the art of architects. Now, there also was a question raised. Oh, it's okay. I'll give the mic to the next speaker. Alexander, go ahead. The final question mentioned neighboring communities. I remember that around 10 years ago, or maybe even 11 years ago, I was reading the strategy for the city of Kyiv. And I decided to look at the European experience, and it was so strange when you're looking at strategy of the city of Kyiv and you see how Kyiv is only focusing on their own issues. But if you look at the European experience, they are not only focusing on what is happening in the city or satellite villages and towns. They also are, for example, trying to think about other large cities. If we, for example, look at the American experience or European experience, because, sometimes people fly to commute to work there. But if we're talking in Ukraine, there are so many people who commute to Kyiv. They live in Brovary, in Boryspil. Sometimes they even live outside of Kyiv Oblast, but they still commute. That is why you also have to take into account whatever that has to do with your neighboring regions and adjacent regions, other millionaire cities. Well, I think that at the top level, we need to work on that. Maybe we have to develop some bylaws so that it is also included into the local and regional strategies, because it is important. This is very relevant in 2025. Well, I'd like to mention a few words about Dream, because I'm never praising them, because I'm expecting them to do more. But in this case, I can say that Dream is helping to solve one of such things. For example, when we're asking what is the portfolio project that the neighboring community have, using the Dream system, the community can take a look at that, and they are actively relying on that. Or for example, when we say that the city wants to look at other cities, not only abroad, but in Ukraine. For example, today we had our colleagues from Zaporizhia, and Zaporizhia oftentimes is compared to Lviv because the population is about the same, etc. And it used to be difficult to find it because not all of that was available on the community website, but now you can rely on Dream, and you can look at the transportation projects, or you can look at energy projects of all the communities that are large industrial ones. So people are relying on Dream, so thank you for that. And we need to have more of such open profiles, and they of course have to comply with the strategic planning, because presently the portfolio does not coincide with the goal tree. Thank you so much, Alexander and Irina and Vadim. Well, but currently in Dream, there will be a line where you can find information about all of the unmovable property. In case you are interested in this, you can think about who are you gonna synchronize your effort with if you want to implement some investment project. So yeah, your neighbors do matter. Yes, and this also responds to the question about updated approach and tools. So the new methodological recommendations are emphasizing collaboration of communities, both at international level as well as at the local level. Thank you. Well, to be honest, as an expert, I want to focus on the time frame, the 7-year time frame. It seems to be absolutely illogical to me. Why is that so? For the strategies to be developed in 2028, we would need to develop regional strategy in 2026, and the national strategy should already be in place so that we can stick to all the requirements. That is why I believe that it is necessary to remove the 7-year time frame from the committees, but to have 3 or 4 terms so that we still have some continuity when it comes to planning. And the strategy life could be way longer. For example, Poland and other countries do that, even despite European 7-year cycle. Their regional strategies until 2030. So they are trying to have this gap. So this is my comment regarding planning time frame. And now regarding training human resources. Well, you see, we should understand and accept the fact that only 3 years ago, the strategy became a mandatory document. Only 2 years ago, we developed the legal foundation that regulates recommendations. And we already want to have lots of amazing experts at the local governance who are thinking strategically, who are energized. But again, these experts, well, it happened, what we had 5-6 years ago was very different. And we had examples in our communities that we worked with last year. So when we came to the community had a strategy, and they clearly understand what should not be done when it comes to strategy, what fuck-ups they had, why the monitoring is not happening, which indicators are not suitable for them. So with each new year, and when a project such as RFA comes to the community, then it changes. Of course, it's going to be faster if there is support and training from the outside, but we are working on it. Thank you. Irina, while you're giving your mic to Vadim, I would like to say that we need to balance the practice of failures in strategic planning with and because currently we're talking about it, this is not correct to plan this. This is right to plan this, but we have to also see these things that have been implemented, then it's gonna simplify our life. Thank you so much. Vadim, over to you. Now, regarding the time frame, I believe that 2 years probably is more predictable horizon. Strategy is not social and cultural development plan. We're talking about the long-term planning for the community. So I believe that we have to do it the same as at the national strategy, the same as the European Union is planning until 2027, but possibly until 2034.
Why not cover a period until 2034, for instance? That would give us at least some time frame. Also, of course, this would be recommendations or something more mandatory. We in Lviv region have a certain rating for communities, and when we evaluate them, it's not just enough to have strategy, because time goes on, and we have to monitor implementation, and communities have to keep up, and everyone seems to be moving forward. I think all communities need a strategy, no doubt about that. I'd be happy to be part of developing the new Lviv strategy, because the current one is running out this year. Andriy is already part of that process, and it is indeed a very topical issue. So you might get lucky and get invited to the working group. The point is that Andriy is right when he's asking question, what next? But what do we have today? We have to analyze where we are. We've carried out this joint event, RFA and Renaissance Foundation, in order to develop the document. After that, the document with all the proposals and analytical comments and supplementary materials, it will be handed over to the ministry. And then, of course, the ministry has to say a final say. But what could be next? There could be recommendations, but they're still recommendations. They're not of mandatory nature. However, parameters of strategic planning means they could become part of the system of evaluating communities. But then the next question is, what about occupied communities? Neither legislation nor recommendations doesn't divide up the communities, or deoccupied, for example, or recently occupied. So in all our approaches, we're saying that recommendations should be of universal nature and such that can be used by anyone. But various scenarios means that the rear communities, for example, are only considering euro integration, right? But occupied communities or recently deoccupied community, I mean, that's a different story. What kind of condition will it be in? It could be fully ruined. You can't even compare different views. So make this optional, giving them flexibility, I think, would make it a much better option. So here we understand we need to include all communities, and within the existing legislation, with a strong emphasis on the fact that all 469 communities have to be covered and be made part of this process. So these are just a few remarks about what next. So what can we do next? We can continue the work on the recommendations, and we can stay in touch with the ministry, of course, on all these issues. And the ministry seems to be prepared to do that. And we could perhaps consider further consultations, but I would like to thank all participants of our panel discussion today, because I think this has been quite fruitful. I'd like to thank our representatives, the Canadian Embassy, representatives from the ministry who have been all day with us. So I thank you very much, and we'll see you again.